Hello everyone, I am Bradley Sward, Associate Professor of Computer and Information Science at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. This video today is going to look at Day 12, Festivities of Advent of Code 2020. My code is in Python this year. So rain risk, here is the data set. It's a letter followed by a number. Number could be any size. I guess you can imagine up to 3 digits or even more. And so for part 1, as you can see here, this is the entire code here, is there are a bunch of different commands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The L is kind of assumed here, and I'm presuming that the data is coming in correctly, and I don't have to worry about any correction of the data. So it's just I have my 7 commands, and I just move north, I move south, I move east, west, left, right, or forward. And so to be able to handle this, I need to know my cardinal directions. So 0 in this case is 1, 0. That's to the right. 0, -1 is up. So this is east. This is north. Wait, hold on. Did I do this right? Let me. That's the problem with this. Yeah, negative. No, negative is down. So it goes from east to down to south to west to north. And so I'm just keeping track of that. And as long as I remember that a right means to go positive through this and a left means to go come back around, everything's going to turn out just fine. So I start my current position at 0, 0 with my direction of 0, which is the east direction. I pull my file in, split by new line, and now for every line in that file, I need to get the command, which is just the first character, and then I need to get the value, which is the integer value of everything that comes after that first character. So far, so good. And so if I go north, I just move north. I just say, okay, this is current position 1, which is my Y position. Just add the value to it. If it's south, subtract the value. If it's east, add the value to the 0 because that's the X. And if it's west, subtract it. So that's the easy part for north, south, east, and west. And that just moves the position around. And so for forward, this one just takes a little more work, and that's why I have this dxy function here, or this list of lists here, is so that if I'm going to move forward 10, well, I'm going to move 10, and depending on the direction, I'm going to go either, if it's 10 times this is 10, 0, or 0, -10. And so this portion gets added to the X, this portion gets added to the Y based off these multiplications. And since I can only go one of the 4 directions in this part of the problem, one of these will 0 out and the other will be whatever it will be, a positive or a negative value, and that will work out for moving forward. And so rotating, I just set it up so that if I rotate to the right, I'm adding to my direction, which is just 0, 1, 2, or 3. That's why I'm dividing by, or doing integer division by 90 here, both ways here. And then I'm saying, okay, if I'm not adding to it, if it's not R, it's got to be an L. So then I'm going to subtract off and go the other way, however many. And just in case I overstep my bounds, I go too far negative or too far positive, I'm going to mod it so that it's always between the values of 0 and 3. And I'm just doing this for every command, and I get for my answer, for my data set, and this is where I know I've had some issues with you guys yesterday, is that my data sets worked perfectly. And I believe, who was I working with? I'm sorry, I forget the name. I'm so sorry for forgetting your name. Thank you for pointing out that my code wasn't perfect, but I believe I fixed it up. I'm pretty sure I fixed it up so it worked for all cases, not just mine. When I worked for when I worked in the slot machine industry, that was always the gold standard. We had little gold stars that we put on our desk that said "works on my machine." Because it would work. It literally would work on my machine. We would send it off to the testers, and the first thing that would come back was nothing works. And the first couple times it was very frustrating learning what the hell, how could something work so well on my machine and not work so well on someone else's. But in this case, different data sets, different setup environments, all sorts of crazy stuff you don't encounter in your day-to-day life, and I don't necessarily encounter that as well. So if I run this through, just every command through my data set, I get the answer of 362 units, and that's how far I am for part 1. The Manhattan distance is 362, so that's what I get. So now part 2 is a little bit different, and this is again where I would love to hear you guys, love to know where you guys come in and make this a little bit different. And so, is this part 2? I think it's part 2. It's got to be part 2, right? And so, oh, I just don't have the, I just don't have all of this on here. Give me 1 second to adjust this and move this over so you can see. Because I'm like, the hard part of my code is not, was not showing there. Okay, so this is, the ship is moving, but the ship only moves now on a forward command. Everything else moves the waypoint or rotates the waypoint and not necessarily the ship. And so things have changed. So now I don't need my ship's direction anymore because it's all tied to the waypoint direction and multiplications thereof. So I kind of changed everything up. You see I imported math because for me, I'm using trig functions because I'm doing 2D transformation matrices, or a matrix down here below, as you could see. So what have I changed up in here? So this is the same, but to say instead of moving the position of the ship, I moved the position of the waypoint by whatever in the north, the south, the east, and the west. So these are very simple. And so the same kind of deal goes here, where I go, okay, wherever my waypoint is right now, if I'm trying to move forward, just multiply the value times it for the 0 or the x position and the y position, and multiply it in and add it to the ship's position. So it moves off, and you're like, okay, but it all ties into what do I do in this case if I'm going to rotate this thing. So my first step here is I understand I either have an R or an L when I get to this position. And so if it's an R, I go to the right. Well, I'm just gonna reverse this so it's always a positive number, or it's always a number going to the left, which would mean I'm adding a number, not necessarily subtracting it. So it's just I'm just kind of normalizing the value between 0 and 180, like positive 180 as opposed to 0 to negative 180, because a left is different than a right. It's a completely a different operation. So okay, and then I take my waypoint direction, which is in degrees. This time around, I didn't do any fancy math with it. I just put it in degrees. And then after I add the value to it, I mod it by 360, which is very similar to the 4 I was modding by earlier. So this gives me a value of either 0, 90, 180, or 270. And so I convert those radians into, the values in degrees into radians. And then I'm not going to go into this discussion. This is just look up a 2D transformation matrix if you're interested in figuring out how I can take a point in space, rotate it around the origin a certain number of degrees, or in this case, a certain number of radians. And then that fixes up the waypoint positioning. And then again, we're just going through over and over and over again. And when I do things this way, I get 29,895. And the reason I use the rounding here is because if I don't use the rounding, I don't get an exact answer. I get an answer that's very, 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 very close, which I can presume is 29,895. But technically speaking, it's not. I mean, it's close enough if it's a floating point. It's not close enough if it is a double. So the rounding just takes care of the arithmetic issues that come around because of that. Yep, there we go. And so I would love to hear from you guys. I hope this thing works for you guys if you copy this and use this in your data set. We're getting to more complicated problems, so it's possible, just like yesterday, nothing works. But I would love to know if there's a simpler way to do this. I'm always learning just like you guys. Is there a simpler way to do this without using matrix transformations and trig math? Maybe I just have trig on the brain since I'm just thinking of trig identities, and I've been looking at calculus and trig substitution and stuff like that in the last couple days. Maybe I just have trig on the brain. Maybe there's a simpler way. I tried just changing x and y values, but that just turned into a bunch of if statements that didn't really get me anywhere. So in the moment, this is the best way that gets me to where I want to go. So as always, swardb@cod.edu is a great way to get a hold of me by email, or if you can get a hold of me here on Facebook. Facebook. This is YouTube. My God, I haven't been on Facebook in years. But anyway, yeah, email me here or text me on here on the YouTube, and let's start a conversation about this like we did yesterday. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys next time.